My assignments later in my career were mostly in North America, in Canada twice, Quebec City and Ottawa and Mexico City. And while I was in Canada, Arctic issues obviously were an important part of the portfolio. We actually had a dispute with Canada over something called the Northwest Passage, which our guest may talk about some tonight. As the polar ice cap melts away, whether you can get a ship through the Northern Passage of Canada is now not a hypothetical question, it's a real question. But we're very fortunate to have with us tonight Mike Sfraga, who has a number of claims to fame. I won't get them all. He's the founder of the Kohler Institute, which is part of the Woodrow Wilson Center for International Scholars in Washington. But most recently, President Biden named him as the chairman of the U.S. Arctic Research Commission. Now, you may be surprised to hear he's actually from Brooklyn, but he went to the northern part, the northern cold part of Brooklyn. But he went to Alaska 44 years ago, had a distinguished career in academia on various research councils. He's a hot property in the media, and especially today, because the Arctic is one of those issues. I used to teach Arctic issues in my classes here, and kind of an esoteric thing, and 40, 50 years ago, that was appropriate because it was frozen most of the year. That's not true anymore, and it poses a number of very unique challenges to the United States because we're an Arctic nation, and especially in the current climate, the other big Arctic nation besides Canada, of course, is Russia. So current events have made Mike's appearance even more timely than we thought when he was first invited. So please join me in welcoming Mike Sfraga to Duke.
Thank you.
Maybe we could get started by, for people who are not familiar with the Arctic. So what is the Arctic and why should we care?
Because I live there. Well, thank you all for having me. Thank you very much for hosting me. Thank the faculty and the students. Paige, where's Paige? Paige, thank you very much, my friend. Yes, she deserves a clap to the hands. We lost her at the Wilson Center to Duke. So Duke's benefit was our loss. And people joke that they just do whatever Paige says, and we do because it always seems to work right. So Paige, thank you very much for everything. So the Arctic. Anybody read Frankenstein? See the movie Frankenstein? Better yet, Young Frankenstein? Okay. Young Frankenstein. I want to answer Frankenstein. Mary Shelley had based her book in the Arctic. It was done for a reason. This sublime, remote, sometimes romantic, all the times freezing place that's of myth and legend and monsters and bad stuff happening up there, right? All the way, who knows? It's not like that. And so the Arctic has gone through so many narratives, like every region of the world. And there's different Arctics. The Arctic is one of the most beautiful, hostile, lovely, freezing. It's just this dichotomy of just swings of temperatures, emotions, and experiences. But there are different Arctics. Steve and I were talking earlier. The Arctic is an ocean surrounded by landmass. The Antarctic is a landmass surrounded by the Southern Ocean. They're very different environments, both experiencing dramatic change at the moment. The current IPCC report came out, which wasn't exactly good for our globe or humans or any living beast on this planet. But the Arctic is very different from the Antarctic, and it's very different from the regions. The North American Arctic that I live in, Alaska, Canada, Greenland, is very different than the Scandinavian Arctic, Norway, Sweden, Finland, even the Nordics, very different. The landscape is different. The Norway, Sweden, Finland part of the Arctic is influenced by the Gulf Stream, you have warm air. So at the same latitudes, very different when you look at what Norway experiences in the winter and what my hometown of Fairbanks experiences in winter. When I'm at 50 below zero, they are not at 50 below zero. The Russian Arctic, vast, very different than other parts of the Arctic. So it's different geographically, different climatologically, but there are incredible links in the Arctic. The indigenous peoples of the Arctic Well, they share so much rich tradition, and if you didn't know any better, if you were in parts of Russia and you came across Alaska, Canada, and went into Greenland, it's one language, cultural ties, family ties. So the Arctic is very dynamic, it's not one Arctic, and it's changing dramatically, and that's what we can talk about tonight. So that's just a scene setter to say nothing is monolithic, lots happening in the Arctic, and we can slice and dice the different issues, which, by the way, are not separate. They're all integrated. And if nothing has shown us, unfortunately, how the Arctic now is global, the issues in Ukraine and Russia have shown us how there is no place on this planet that is disconnected, including Mary Shelley's Frankenstein setting. It's just not remote anymore.
Thank you for that. I guess maybe we should start with what's changing in the Arctic environmentally. Can you, I know we were talking before, I think you said that this past year was the ice sheet shrank to its second smallest dimension in recorded history. So it's sort of obvious, but maybe it's not. What is causing that? Is it accelerating? And what does that mean for navigation, for security, for polar bears, et cetera?
Yeah, what it means for all of us, the Arctic, we don't realize that, there's a difference between climate and weather. There's what they tell us is going to happen Thursday, and sometimes it happens, and sometimes it doesn't. Climate is what we all live in, long-term stability. Our species has known a certain climate variable. Obviously, ice age isn't on, but it's the climate versus weather. What we're seeing now is something that is just so dramatic. In the last 30 years, new research suggests that in the last 30 years, whereas before we were using a 50-year scale, last 30 years, the higher latitudes, the Arctic has warmed nearly 4 times the global average. So just think about what's happening in the rest of our world and do that 4 times, and you'll see what's happening in the north. As a result, the Arctic Ocean pack ice, the ice that has been basically there since we've been around far longer than that, what we have seen as norms and variability over time, a change happened in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and of course now. And that is that pack ice that's always been at the top of the world has been shrinking over time. And now that diameter has shrunk so much that it's on a scale that we've not seen aside from one other time in recent years. So the second, when they take these measurements, they take them in September, it's the second lowest since we've had good satellite data. So what does that mean? It means that the refrigerators of the world, the Arctic and the Antarctic, they regulate our climate. Well, they're out of whack. The jet stream that we all know, the weather patterns we all know, we've all talked about it. Jesus, isn't the weather weird? Well, we're seeing this all over the world. And whether you live in Fort Lauderdale or Fort Yukon, Alaska, you're experiencing climate change. Ask an insurance company, they'll tell you it's real. It's more dramatic because it's happening up there at such a scale. And the unfortunate part of this is that, many unfortunate parts, one unfortunate part is that as the ice shrinks, because you have ambient temperature that's warm, as that shrinks, the solar radiation, the sun, used to reflect off that ice, just like when you go skiing, the sun reflects off the snow. Less ice, less reflection. It's called an albedo effect, which means that dark gray ocean, more and more of it's being exposed. Boy, this is sounding like a downer. Don't worry, I'll make it better. It starts to absorb heat, which is called a positive feedback loop, which is negative to all of us, but it makes it warmer. So it just feeds on itself. So it shrinks and shrinks and shrinks. It has implications for fish stocks, whales, polar bears, me and you, the indigenous people that live there, the permafrost. This is soil that's been permanently frozen for eons. Russia, Alaska, Canada, parts of northern Norway. This is ground that has been frozen since we can remember. That is now thawing on a scale that no one ever imagined. And on that ground are airports, runways, houses, fuel depots, oil infrastructure. A civilization in the north was built on frozen ground. We know how to engineer that really well. We know how to build on frozen ground. We don't do well when we're trying to build on ground that's literally thawing beneath our feet. with methane coming out of that permafrost that's been stored for eons. That's adding to the climate cycle. So the major driver of change in the Arctic is, in my opinion, climate, from which there are 6 other drivers, because I have 7, 6 other drivers that are a result of this climate change and what's happening. So it gives us more space for military movement, it gives more space for tourism, it gives more space for resource development, it gives us space, it gives us time, it gives us opportunity, and unfortunately gives us the opportunity for conflict as well.
Let's talk about as the polar ice cap shrinks, this new world of transportation across the Arctic Ocean that was never possible before because of the sea pack. And my understanding is there's the northern route and the southern route. The northern route goes along the Russian coast, and the southern route goes along Alaska, Canada. And as I recall, if you're shipping something from Shanghai to New York, and you can send a cargo ship through the Arctic, you cut 7 days off of what it would take to go through the Panama Canal. And I think that the savings are even more dramatic if you're going to Northern Europe, if you can cut across the Arctic. Is that a thing yet? Are ships regularly plying the Arctic Ocean, and who's controlling that? Who's setting up the rules?
Who's in charge of this? Somebody call somebody. It's sort of a thing. It's a sort of thing. Up and over the top of the Arctic is not a thing yet. There's still ice there in the winter. And you're talking about thick ice, formidable ice. And to get an icebreaker costs something that none of us in this room collectively could afford for a day. It is just an enormous amount of money. So to go up and over the top to deliver goods, I think is many decades out. Not that it's not feasible, you can do it, but the cost to shipping, Maersk is not going to make money. They're just not going to make money on it yet. But unfortunately, as climate changes, we don't know. But what we do see is an incredible increase in shipping along the Northern Sea Route. This is Russia's northern Arctic border. And it's been destinational for forever. The Russians have done a really nice job, which is why they got a fleet of Russian icebreakers that are, depending on who you talk to, between 40 and 50. That's a lot of icebreakers. We have 2, sometimes 1.5, literally. There are nations that are not Arctic nations that have more icebreakers than our country has. That's not a good thing. We can talk about that as well. But Russia has been shipping resources to its own people, right? And the Russian North is just rich in minerals, oil, gas, strategic rare earths. It's just incredible resource rich, which is what you've seen President Putin try to develop. So destinationally, they've been used to traveling the big Russian rivers that freeze and the Northern Sea Route to bring resources to their own people and to ship via Norway up and over to Europe that way for yet forever. So that's been going on. What's changed dramatically is the Northern Sea Route. The route that would take an icebreaker or a cargo ship from, we'll just say, east of Murmansk along the Northern Sea Route and then down the Bering Strait. Remember, the United States has 3 borders: Canada, which you are quite familiar with, Mexico, which you are quite familiar with, and we have a maritime border with Russia. It's a great Jeopardy question. How many borders does the United States have? 3. That route, the Northern Sea Route down the Bering Strait between Alaska and Russia into markets in China is what we're seeing, and other Asian countries is what we're seeing, is that for the first time, you can basically bring an LNG icebreaker, a chassis of an icebreaker with big LNG tanks on it, from the Yamal Peninsula in the north of Russia, along the sea route, down the Bering Strait, into markets in Asia, 13 days, as opposed to 35 bringing it the other way, or 40, which every day you're not shipping, you're making cash. And that's really attractive to global energy markets. Now, they don't make furniture in northern Russia, right? So it's not going to be the Suez Canal or Panama Canal, but it has a niche. And that's what the globe has been watching, this niche. But it's right now based on energy and some minerals, based on energy, as opposed to the Northwest Passage, which is a far more difficult, far more complicated route geographically, not just politically. We can talk about that too. then to go along that route, the commerce isn't there yet. Very tricky geography, as opposed to the Northern Sea Route, which is pretty predictable. But that's two reasons. One, great icebreakers, but two, that CPAC has receded. So you don't have the big ice that you had decades ago. So it's made it easier and more affordable. That's why you see a buildup in facilities along the entire Northern Sea Route for oil and gas development. Mostly, that's why China has provided billions of dollars to the Russian Federation to build oil and gas facilities so that they would have a guarantee to their markets, the Chinese markets. And that's why the Russian Federation has taken that money to build that infrastructure, in addition to the infrastructure of its military buildup, which has been parallel to its economic buildup, both on the land, along with its economic development, and in islands far above the Northern Sea Route, very strategically placed, so that you had this, what I call this afternoon, the sandwich between a whole Northern Sea Route, which is oil, gas, and mineral resource based, a layer of very strategic air bases, some rebuilt from the Soviet era, some new, and then on the far North Islands, you see very sophisticated radar and Air Force and military installations, basically saying, this is my whole area. Whether you think it's international waters or not, this entire area, 12 miles, and then 200 miles, exclusive economic zone and more, I have control of this Arctic choke point from the Russian Federation's point of view, to which many international, other countries don't believe past the 12 mile zone you would have that much influence. But that's what you've seen, and it's been energy driven. It's been driven by China. It's been driven by global prices of those commodities, and it's been driven by the Russian Federation's willingness to invest their own dollars, but also to really build their Arctic in a way that no one else has done on that scale in that environment. That was a really long answer.
That's a good answer. It seems to me a couple of years ago, a Russian submarine planted a Russian flag at the North Pole and claimed it for Russia. So does that mean Russia believes that those aren't international waters? You alluded to that a minute ago, but all the way to the North Pole, they're making a territorial claim, or at least for a marine boundary that goes that far?
Yes and no. Two things. Our colleague Artur Chilangarov was on that submarine. He's a very well-known man in Russia, and to those in the Arctic space, an explorer, financier. It was his own private expedition that brought that flag down and dropped it at the North Pole. So he, in some ways, so it wasn't claimed for Russia, but he put a Russian flag right at the geographic North Pole, which, fascinating expedition. But that got the world's attention to the Arctic. It was like a Sputnik moment. It was, who did what? Where? And that really spurred a lot of interest in the Arctic. He wasn't necessarily claiming it for the Russian Federation, but he was simply making a statement that, first of all, he was under the pack ice at the North Pole. That was an expedition. But also the fact that the Arctic was important. And of course, the press went every which way with it. Having said that, there is a process for claiming that seabed all the way out to the North Pole. There is a process, and that is what's happening now. Every country of littoral states, the states that are in the Arctic Ocean, not Norway, not Finland, not Sweden, not Finland, but Denmark, Greenland, the United States, Canada, Russia, can make a claim to the ocean floor all the way out to the North Pole if you survey it, which is happening, and you prove that that seabed is attached to your continental shelf, which you have to do it scientifically and you have to do it in international courts. And that's what's happening now. So the Russians have made a claim. There'll be overlapping claims. It'll be adjudicated. I do not think we're going to go to war over that particular issue. But there is a process, and all nations seem to be following quite nicely, and it's all supposed to be focused on scientific fact, not I therefore claim this for my country. But Chilangarov actually did a lot of good for the Arctic community by at least raising the awareness that the Arctic was even there.
Isn't the law of the sea what sets the rules for making these claims scientifically? And is it a disadvantage that the United States has never ratified the laws of the Sea Convention? Are we disadvantaged in this process?
I think we are. We're disadvantaged in the process because if you don't sign on to this Law of the Sea Treaty, which we have not. There are some members of Congress that have a problem with it because they believe we will cede to the UN and the international courts U.S. Claims and U.S. freedoms of navigations and many, many other things. I do not think that that's real. I think that we should sign on to the law of the sea because the law of the sea provides a nation a say at the table as to how we govern. But the United States abides by all of the treaty systems built into, all of the agreements built into UNCLOS. But it does put us at a disadvantage with our other 8 nations. And it's not just about the Arctic, it's about the entire globe. This treaty, it's about all sorts of issues, fisheries, and, seabeds, and all the issues related to oceans. So it does put us, I think, at a disadvantage, even though we abide by it, that we haven't yet signed on to it. And there might be some pressure growing to do that.
Most of what I learned about the Arctic while serving in Canada dealt with security issues. And as you know, we have a bilateral treaty with Canada, the North American Aerospace Defense Command, which has existed since the Cold War, since the 50s, where we have worked together to detect and potentially counter Russian attacks coming over the North Pole. Initially bombers, later ICBMs. And I think to this day, Russian fighters buzz US and Canadian fighters, they jockey in that air identification zone over the Arctic. But a former boss of mine once said that, or maybe it was a Canadian who said that if anybody ever tried to invade North America via the North Pole, they would need to be rescued. You can't just land a boat up there in the north and head south. So what is the potential security threat?
And there is a security threat. And there is a great game going on. It used to be submarines and in the air during the Cold War, and even after. And that seemed to have died down a bit when the Soviet Union dismantled itself. And unfortunately, in the last decade or so, it's heated back up, and now we're at a very different place. I don't think anybody's going to go to war about something about the Arctic. The security space is real. This competition in the North is real. It's not just economic. There are security and homeland security issues. There's mill-to-mill security issues. There's homeland security issues. And then there's a civil security issue. What happens? What happens when a 3,000 passenger Princess tour ship gets in trouble in the Arctic? Because it's going to happen, because it happened in the Antarctic. What happens? It's the tyranny of distance. You can get a plane up that far just to watch that ship sink. You're not going to be able to save 3,000 people. Hell, you won't be able to save 300 people. There just isn't the capacity. So there's a security dimension that is a dimension within a dimension within a dimension. But there's a real issue on the mill-to-mill and hard security side, because that pack ice has become far smaller. It's opened up the space to influence. You have presence is influence. We know that from our books, and we know that from reality. And so you see a lot of Arctic exercises happening. The US, NATO, the Russian Federation, happening right now in Norway is a NATO exercise, pre-planned before Ukraine. In another couple of weeks, there's a NATO exercise off the coast of Norway. This is for interoperability, so troops and vessels can test themselves in this new, quote unquote, new environment. 3,500 servicemen from 25 different countries will train together off the coast of Norway and on land. This is what's happening in the Arctic, and the Russian Federation is doing exactly the same thing. They're drilling on the North Atlantic side, they're drilling in the Barents Sea, they're drilling in the Arctic, they're drilling in Bering. So you're seeing a lot of increased activity for domain awareness to understand what this new environment looks like, to get men and women ready to fight, potentially, see how weapons systems work, test radar. And then when the Russian bombers test airspace and we test airspace, you get a good idea of what your opponent has or does not have. Submarine warfare is another issue for those of you who studied history. The GI-UK gap, Greenland, Iceland, United Kingdom, there's this gap that comes out of the Arctic, very, very important during the Cold War, very, very important now. There's a pickup in pace as we play this different great game. Before that, we played it under the ice and satellites in air. Now we're seeing it on the surface. So the security dimension is not about a war, it's about exercising, and what we worry about prior to Ukraine, because I can make a direct arc from Ukraine to the Yukon, is there would be a miscommunication, a misstep. You read a pilot who's probing and there's an accident. And that's what we all worried about in terms of a war in the Arctic. Many of us did not think, and I still don't think we go to war because of we claim this. I worry about the spillover, like Ukraine. All of a sudden, NATO, and Norway is a NATO member. You're hearing about the Northern Fleet, Russia's Northern Fleet in Murmansk. When's the last time you heard Northern Fleet? And the fact that the Russian Federation moved battleships and other capacities down to Ukrainian theater. The Murmansk and the Kola Peninsula is not only home to the Northern Fleet, it's their second strike nuclear capability, and it's where their big boomers, their big submarines are. So that Arctic may be up here, but it's always been part of the Russian play for how they have viewed their military and their security stance, which NATO needs to watch, which is why you have drills off the coast of Norway, which is why many of us worry that as we increase pace of exercises and could misread something, it could have a conflict. But the Arctic is directly related to what's happening in Ukraine. It's there, the impact is there. It's not just moving ships around. It's moving material and expertise. But what's the major issue at play? Energy, aside from the horror of one country invading another sovereign country and doing what's happening today. I worry about getting to Europe, to the airplane on time, and other people, they're just worrying about getting their child out of their country, which is just think about that for a moment. But energy as a weapon, and the Arctic for the Russian Federation is that energy that feeds the bank and could also be used as a weapon, which is why many of us were surprised, pleased, perhaps, that Germany turned their policy around within 48 hours on energy and the SWIFT banking system, because those are two things. I mean, the Germans are really dependent on the gas. Europe gets 40% of its LNG from Russia. So it's the Arctic plays into all of these things, whether we have thought about them or not. If I could just do one more riff here for a moment. I really hope this is helpful, interesting. Thank you for being kind and saying yes. And Paige has heard this 400 times, but to Mike, there are 7 drivers, 7 issues at play in the Arctic. And one night in a run, I kept thinking, how do I communicate better to us, to my colleagues, to Congress when I testify, to lawmakers around the world, to ambassadors, to my own home state? How do I communicate the Arctic? Because one senator said to me after a testimony, Mike, look, I get it. Okay, the Arctic's important, I got it. And all those things you said, I get it. But it's too big. I don't know what to do with it. And so I'm on this committee and this committee. I don't know what to do with this. He said, it's like climate change. I get it, but I'm not quite sure. I don't know what to, if I have a bill, I'll vote for it, but I don't know what to do. And I thought about that really, really hard. So when out on the run, I kept thinking, okay, how do we break the Arctic down for people who are not in tune with it, and asking, how do I connect my world? Why is it important to me? Why should Ethel in Missouri care about the Arctic? All right. And so on the run, I thought, okay, well, climate, that's the major one. And then there are these commodities we're talking about, and each one of my 7 started with a C, but full disclosure, when it didn't start with a C, I made it start with a C. So, and this became the core of what I've been talking about, which is navigating the Arctic's 7 seas, navigating the 7 seas. Right, it's a hook, I know, it's a shtick, I got it. But you remember it, and I thought, okay, I can work with this. And so over time, I've been building this art, navigating the Arctic 7 seas, navigating our new Arctic. How do we do this? And how we navigate this new Arctic will basically define the future Arctic. And what are they? It's climate, it's commodities, it is commerce, it's the new shipping routes that could or could not happen. I mean, they'll continue to grow. It's connectivity, not 5G, although that's pretty cool. But it's ports and roads and rails. It's the infrastructure. It's the connectivity of the North, including the peoples of the North. It's the communities of the North. Social justice, access, indigenous peoples, subsistence versus development, alcohol. I mean, I can name a whole bunch of issues that you had to deal with in Canada with indigenous peoples. We have to deal with Alaska. The Sami have to deal with it in Norway, Sweden, Finland, and Russia. Communities is the fifth one. The sixth is cooperation. The Arctic is actually a very peaceful, stable place. It's not the Wild West that you might hear about. It is governed. The Arctic Council is composed of the 8 Arctic nations. It's a consensus body. It doesn't tell anybody who's the boss of anybody else, but it has developed binding agreements that the nations have agreed to. And they come together as the Arctic Council. They don't tell each other what to do, but they're mostly focused on environmental issues, search and rescue, what happens if there's an oil spill in the Arctic, from which a number of other organizations have been spawned or at least generated, like the Arctic Coast Guard Forum. The 8 Arctic nations, including the Russian Federation, work together on interoperability. They do tabletops together. Just a few months ago in Anchorage, Alaska, Russians were working alongside of US Coast Guard folks because it's going to take every Coast Guard in the north to save that ship. Everybody, all in, because it's just too big. So there's a lot of cooperation in the Arctic. And the 7th C is competition, because there is competition here. There are the issues of this hard security that are real. And our nation has spun up its efforts. Every one of the branches of service now has an Arctic strategy. It's up to Secretary Austin now to integrate those. My own home delegation of Alaska, Senator Murkowski, Senator Sullivan, leaning way forward on DOD's preparation for this new Arctic, not in a hawkish sense, but in a preparation sense. And it makes all the sense in the world. So those are my 7 C's. And so when I talk to anybody, I tell them, just think of the 7 C's. And I can guarantee you will have an interest or an equity in one of those C's, and then I can connect it to your area of interest, your constituents, because that C works, and you can move those C's around however you want. There's probably 9 L's, 12 Q's, I don't know, but at least the 7 C's works, at least for me, to try to at least communicate to folks what I believe are the 7 key issues at play currently in the Arctic. That was not a commercial. I just hope that it's helpful to you, because it's how I have finally been able to frame the issues.
We just checked. The Department of Defense budget for fiscal year 22 is $740 billion. I might add the State Department budget is $60 billion.
They may know that too.
So how come we only have 2 icebreakers and one of them doesn't work half the time? I mean, what are they doing with that money? Isn't there an Arctic command? How do the Arctic, how long is the Alaska coastline? What country is it right next to? So how do you explain that we've gotten to this point and we're so woefully underprepared?
It's a great question. So the Coast Guard is Homeland Security. We had 3, but a Polar Sun, Polar Star. Those are big, heavy icebreakers, usually going down to the Antarctic. And then we have the Coast Guard cutter Healy, which is a medium Coast Guard cutter. Pretty good ship. Spends most of its time in Arctic waters. It simply wasn't a priority, period. They allowed one of these heavy icebreakers to totally, be mothballed. It's cannibalized to feed the other big heavy icebreaker so that it can cut ice for our research community when it goes down to the Antarctic. And we have the Healy, which is now 40 years old. So we were very busy in other parts of the world in the last 20 years. And that's where all the focus went. It went there. Don't talk to me about icebreakers. Don't talk to me about the Arctic. I had this other mission after 9/11 and before that has consumed the nation. I get it. And so it's about what are the priorities and what are the needs of our Coast Guard and our Departments of Defense, different agencies. It simply hasn't been a priority because the ice has been receding, and then all of a sudden it's kind of like the frog boiling. Then all of a sudden we have a new world. And we realize as a great nation, we only have two ships available to us to cut ice, to get scientists where they need to be, or for search and rescue. And we have no presence in the Arctic, whereas the Russians have 50 icebreakers. Again, they're not projecting power with these icebreakers, but they're projecting presence. China is on equal par with us and about to build a 3rd. And they're doing it indigenously. They're building their own. Why would China want icebreakers? I'll tell you about, I can talk about that too. It simply hasn't been in our priority list along all those others. However, because Russia has 50, because China started building their own, because fishing fleets are headed north, because we see lots of fishing going on in the Barents, because we're concerned about this new environment, Just a few years ago, Congress finally passed a bill to fund 2, maybe 3 now, brand new icebreakers. The Coast Guard said we'd like 6. Congress said, well, maybe allocate money for 3. We got 2. Third one probably will be financed, but there ain't one of those in the water yet. The first one's still being built. These things take long periods of time, and that will likely be a heavy, which will be could be both Arctic and Antarctic. But that's a long answer, but it simply hasn't been a priority for us. And the other part is one of our former Coast Guard commandants, it was brilliant marketing. I mean, I thought it was pretty good with 7 Seas, but this guy was much better than me. Former Coast Guard commandant, they changed the name. It wasn't just the Coast Guard. Changed the name from a icebreaker, which sounds just as, rip-roaring fun as anything else. It's an icebreaker. Or you could call it, in this current world of great power competition, China, Russia, US, you could call that same icebreaker a polar security cutter. Well, now you got my attention. Yeah, it's polar security. Now we're all in there. It's part of, but it's the truth. You have to have influence. You have to be there. And so Congress supported polar security cutters, which in a lot of good ways, it's a great thing. But know that our icebreaking fleet of 2 mostly supports research. The vast majority of the time in the water is supporting Arctic and Antarctic research. The vast majority of its mission sets and gaining knowledge of the environment. But that's why. And you'll see more focus on, I think, the Coast Guard's mission, because there'll be more traffic headed north, especially along the strategic Bering Strait.
It's too bad they didn't discover an Al-Qaeda cell in some Inuit village up north. Then, the global war on terrorism could have focused on the Arctic.
It is, but when you raise Russia and China, if you say China and the Arctic, you say China and anything, and you get people's attention, and they should get our attention, because that's real. I mean, China has significant, well-established research institutes, Arctic and Antarctic. They're very good. But there's also other motives there, exploring this new landscape. And if you let me do this one, so if you thought 7 Seas was bad, wait till you hear this one. So I tried to explain in a non-pejorative way. When people ask what's China's motives in the Arctic, Russia's motives in the Arctic, but how does Russia see the Arctic? How does China see the Arctic? How does the US see the Arctic? It doesn't fit perfectly, but it gets a chuckle, but then it allows folks to actually think a little bit. So I try to give them game analogies. If you think of Russia, writ large now globally, but if you think about them in the Arctic, and you give it a game analogy, to me, again, not pejorative, because I don't mean to be pejorative, but if you think about Russia, they play the game Survivor. We're seeing it play out now. They have energy, they have natural resources, and they have nuclear weapons. It's 140 plus million people, 11 time zones, declining demographic, declining economics, a declining superpower. So they're playing the game Survivor, not pejorative, by the way. Great deal of respect for the Russian people. It's a great country. China plays the game Go. That strategy board game Go. Long term, I'm just going to surround and take over the board, and then I'm going to influence the heck out of everything on this board. Long term. They do it in Africa, the Middle East. So why would they be interested in the Arctic? Because it's a thing. It's a part of the globe, and their long-term strategy is to influence. They don't want to argue with you. They want to influence the game. They want to influence the globe. We see it all over. The Arctic is a piece. It's not the priority. It's a piece. If you give it space, they want influence. They play the game Go. The United States, not pejorative, plays the game Twister. Thank you for laughing. And I don't mean that pejorative. We're a great country. I believe in our mission. I believe in our goals around the nation. I actually believe in this stuff. But when you put the green dot of the Arctic on a map of Twister, and you tell the Department of Defense you got to cover that one too, they are spread all over the globe. So you can see where Twister might impact. Do I get an icebreaker, or do I try to get an aircraft carrier? Even though the money is really different. Do I get a bomber, or do I get an icebreaker? I got to think about the global mission sets versus just this initiative. Sorry for the long narrative. But the game analogy works if you don't rest everything on it and you don't use it pejoratively, but it gives you insight into the three nations, I think.
What are the implications? US-Russian relations are, I think it's fair to say, at low ebb right at the moment. Is there a possibility for blowback in the Arctic context where, from what you said, the model has been cooperation up till now? What are the possible implications if things really pull back on both sides and become more hostile?
4 days ago, I would have said, I'm concerned with the small C. I'm concerned with the big C now. And that's not, I believe in Arctic cooperation. Work with many of my Russian colleagues. I believe in the Arctic Council. There's great stuff going on in the North. But this is so egregious. This is so beyond anything. And I think it's okay to compare this to a World War II invasion of another nation on this scale. I gave an interview last week to an outlet, and I invoked World War II. And when I hung up the phone, I thought, wait a minute, was that right for me to do that? Did I go over the line on this one? And I don't think I did. I really don't, because I think it's shattered. This has shattered every norm since World War II, in my opinion. And you can't simply think that this is business as usual. And so although, and I remain a staunch supporter of Arctic cooperation, you cannot have work done, good work, informative work in the Arctic without leaving out the largest Arctic nation, Russia. Longest coastline, biggest chunk of real estate. They are an Arctic nation. And it's hard to move forward in addressing climate change or all the other issues we're addressing in the North without the largest nation in the Arctic. However, I don't know how you do business as usual with bilaterally or multilaterally with the Russian Federation at this point. This is not about my Russian colleagues or friends, or they do great work. But I'm concerned that what's held the fiber of the Arctic together through the Arctic Council, this incredible spirit of cooperation, will be dented, pierced, because of what's happening on this scale. If you think about the Arctic in the last 25 years or so, since the Arctic Council has been operating in this consensus body, think about this. Even post-Crimea, we were able to keep the Arctic Council together. There were some stumbling blocks after Russia invaded Crimea, but the Arctic Council went back to work, and several binding agreements from all 8 nations were signed. Search and rescue agreements, the Central Arctic Ocean's Fisheries Agreement, not to fish in the Central Arctic Ocean until we do more research for the next 16 years to understand what's there before you start fishing, because we don't know what's there yet. Lots of agreement, and led by the US and Russia. We have a marine transport agreement with tracking of ships in the Bering Strait. It's an agreement between the United States and Russia to monitor ships going throughout the Bering Strait because it's becoming a choke point. That's an agreement between the two nations. So good work was done post 2014. This is not 2014. And so I'm very concerned that it won't totally destroy the Arctic Council. I don't think that'll happen. It won't totally destroy cooperation, but it will unfortunately set it back a bit. So that cooperation, especially scientific research, which as the chair of the Arctic Research Commission, I'm very concerned about. How am I to guide research policy in the United States if I don't have access to data from the largest chunk of real estate in the Arctic? It just simply is incomplete data sets. So how could good science inform good policy? I worry about that on multiple scales. And the job of the Arctic Research Commission is to advise the president and advise Congress on Arctic research and related policies. We work with Russian colleagues all the time. I'm concerned that because of all these sanctions, which are legit, that it will take so many decades to get back to where we are. I hope I'm wrong on the decades part, but I think I'm right about it's just going to halt, augment the cooperation that's been happening now more than ever. Even before Ukraine, things were tense. But we'd always say, hey, in the Arctic, it's very different. And it was. I think we'll see some ramifications for cooperation in the North, unfortunately, for a few years.
We get along quite well with the Canadians, but we do have some border disputes with them. You're the geographer, so you probably know about the one in the Beaufort Sea We have a different definition of how that border extends into the ocean. And it creates this wedge of territory, which is extremely large. Now, most people wouldn't care, except that there's proven oil and gas under that part of the Arctic Ocean. I think it's actually more oil than gas, although it could be the other way around. So I know Shell tried to drill for oil in the Chukchi Sea, and this did not end well. And environmentalists were aghast because it's hard enough to clean up an oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico, where the water is warm and microorganisms actually chew up the oil over time. We know from the Exxon Valdez disaster that when oil hits cold water, it just balls up and becomes tar balls that don't go anywhere. So what's your prediction? Are we going to see drilling in the Arctic Ocean, not on land, which already exists, of course? Or is it realistic to think that anybody will be drilling for oil underwater in the Arctic anytime in the near future?
I don't think it is, not on the scale that you're talking about. Shell put in $4, $5, $6 billion in test sites, EPA requirements, and all the work, and they came up empty in terms of hitting an oil patch that would bring back money. There's oil there, but it just wasn't what they thought. They cut their losses and left. I don't think they'll be drilling. The reason that there's even a debate about, well, there's a debate because of territorial claims. But the nice thing is with the Canadians, we kind of have a great relationship with them. We just agree that we'll survey and we'll come up with an agreement. But there's no reason to worry about this right at the moment. Nobody's going to drill out there yet. The economics just aren't there. The cost of drilling offshore is immense. Even though oil's hitting 100 and you pick a number today, that has to be sustained over time. And I don't know that the economics work for drilling in that particular area. So I don't worry about the border dispute. I think we'll have a gentleman's agreement like we have with the Northwest Passage, where the Canadians say that's our internal waters and the United States says, no, we see those as international waters. And the Canadians say, no, those are ours. And we say, okay, here's the deal. We want to run our Coast Guard cutter through, a Coast Guard icebreaker through. And the Canadians say, well, it's our land. And the Americans say, well, here, I'll call 1-800-Canada. Hi, it's the United States. We're going to take the Coast Guard cutter Healy, which we just did this. The United States just did this last summer. And it was accompanied by Coast Guard icebreakers from Canada. And it was a joint expedition to survey the Northwest Passage. Did it together, coordinated research and science, coordinated search and rescue. We told them we'd be there. They said, okay, you can come. We said, we're going to be there. And it was a nice relationship all the way through the Northwest Passage. So these are agreements. We have an agreement to disagree on the disposition, but the cooperation is like this between the two nations. So I don't worry about that. But the economics of drilling offshore in the Arctic are just immense. Even though you have a receding, because there's receding ice doesn't mean there's ice. In fact, it's more unpredictable now than ever because you have icebergs and you've got, who knows what with the shifting landscapes. So I think the technology is there, but they can get cheaper oil and gas elsewhere without putting in wells offshore in very treacherous waters. It's still going to be hard to do business there for the next 30, 40, 50 years.
It is almost time for questions from the audience. So let me just ask one screwball question. And this may be out of your wheelhouse. Did you see that movie, The Day After Tomorrow?
I did.
Okay. So the premise.
Just don't ask me about other movies I've watched.
Don't ask you what?
Don't ask me about other movies I've watched, because then they'll all think I'm.
So the premise was that because of changes in the temperature of polar waters, that the Gulf Stream shuts off. And I forget exactly what the premise for the movie was, but in fact, the Labrador current, which comes down along the coast of Maine, New Brunswick, and so on, has diminished in recent years. And because of that, more of the Gulf Stream eddies go up into the Gulf of Maine, which is, I think, the fastest warming body of water in the world, with implications for lobster catches and lots of other things. So you know enough about that, it's all about salinity and currents and so on. Is one of the repercussions of a warming Arctic that there could be some catastrophic and hard to predict climate event on a grand scale that people should be concerned about?
Yeah, I know enough, don't know everything, but at the 50,000 foot level, if you think about the Atlantic and the Gulf Stream, that's warm water being, driven north, and that's why London has the temperatures it does in Norway and Iceland, and, Iceland is very different in the winter as compared to Siberia, very different, and it's because of that warm Gulf Stream. There is evidence to suggest that Gulf Stream is slowing down. Also, there's lots of evidence, proof, that the Greenland ice cap is melting on a scale that just won't make sense to any of us. The amount of fresh water being poured into the Arctic is so significant, it's changing the very chemistry of the water, which is what you're talking about. So that has implications for fish stocks, lobsters, and climate. And so if that conveyor belt of warm water slows down, some places will be colder, some places will be warmer, but you're changing climate systems. It's very, very difficult. You can't just put your finger on, this is the reason why we have climate change. There's so much change happening. It's like the butterfly flutter. Something happens over here, it's going to connect over there. So you have that effect. And we're very concerned about that. It's not going to happen overnight. But there is a slowdown of that conveyor belt of the Gulf Stream, which impacts the weather systems not just along the Gulf and in Norway, Sweden, Finland, you name it, Iceland, but has implications for the rest of the planet. There are fish stocks in my own home state that are in places that the elders, Alaskan natives, have never caught that species there before. It's just not been there. But now they're catching fish that have never been there before. Same thing on the Barents side. So the migration patterns are changing drastically. Some to the good, some invasive species that would push out other species. So it's climate. It's also right now today, whether it's lobster or my home state's pride of salmon, there's impacts.
We turn it over to you now for any questions. Jack has a microphone. If you could identify yourself and ask your question.
Hi, I'm Emma Dries. I'm a first year MPP at Duke. And I just wanted to, you mentioned how there was, this variability over the past 20 years of priorities and how the Arctic was not one of them. What should the Biden administration focus on over the next 2 years, and what do you think is really missing in American policy?
Wow. Policy writ large or related to the Arctic?
Related to the Arctic.
Related to the Arctic. So I can say that it's moving in the right direction, but I'll give you some other recommendations. In the last, since the president's been in office, a number of things have happened that encourage me, or else I would not be chairing this U.S. Research Commission. One is doubling down on the Arctic Executive Steering Committee. This is a group that was brought together by President Obama to facilitate and coordinate the federal government's equities in the Arctic. A whole of government approach. Now, whole of anything approach is the most difficult. It's whole of government. That's tough to get it right. I mean, think about a university setting. You get all the faculty behind something, it's really hard. But at least there's now this committee that talks to NOAA, talks to NSF, talks to DOD about what the issues are in the Arctic and how you leverage the capacities of these federal agencies toward a goal. This administration is driven on this climate issue and social justice and domestic and foreign policy having a nexus. And if anywhere it shows you that it's in the Arctic, that's foreign policy and it's domestic policy. So that group being reconstituted and meeting, I know because I have a seat on it, meeting constantly, is very positive with a goal. And that goal, part of the goal, will be when the United States, hopefully in the next several months, releases a new national strategy of the Arctic region, the NSAR. So right now, folks are working on the new national strategy for the Arctic region. That will be in place for the next 10 years. And that will drive US policy, domestic and foreign, on how we interact with our 7 other friends in the North, and how we as the United States prioritize issues related to the North. And that will be both our domestic interests and our foreign policy interests. So those are 2 things. The third is elevating research, which this administration has done, to inform policy. Well, that's a good thing. Good, solid data to inform your decision making. These icebreakers are another one. Now, that was done under the Trump administration, and to give the Trump administration some kudos here, they also established a consulate in Nuuk, Greenland. That's in our nation's best interest. We had a consulate there. In fact, we were a protectorate of Greenland during the Second World War. But to reconstitute a consulate there says something about your priorities in the North. It also is very smart because China is very interested in Greenland. Greenland is so strategic to the United States and to allies, if you think about where it sits. But there's that stood up. These icebreakers were advanced Trump administration into the Biden administration by Congress and the executive branch. And a lot more focus on climate. It is the cross-cutting issue. You don't get away with it, which is why my 7 C's starts with the first C of climate, because you cannot do anything else without recognizing that as impact. Now, I think it's about the execution. If you ask me what thought there should be, the number one thing that I would say is, aside from supporting those icebreakers, and aside from additional infrastructure in my own home state for both homeland security, economic development, and our national security, that a port needs to be built in America's Arctic. We do not have an Arctic port. It doesn't exist. The port of Nome could be. It's a $250 million investment that has just been directed to the port of Nome, a multi-use port that's good for fishing industry, economic development, our own presence, national security, homeland security, Coast Guard. We need to have that happen. Biggest priority I would have for the Biden administration is to take this national strategy for the Arctic region, which hopefully will be released in a few months, and build a robust and funded implementation plan. Because all strategies are just absolutely wonderful. They're great, they have great pictures, they say great things. It's the implementation. And so it's the follow through. And that would be where I would say would be the number one priority going forward. Because I think the priorities are set up well now. Not 100%, but well now. So that would want to give you one more, which is popular in some circles and not in others, which is we have to transition to a green energy, green economy. It's just going to happen. It's happening. But in order to get there, you have to diversify your production and your access to these rare earth strategic minerals. America's Arctic has a lot of them in Alaska. Now, that's controversial because I'm talking about mining, but done in a reasonable, responsible way. But getting yourself off of one nation, China, for all of your strategic rare earth mineral production and mostly a corner on the market seems not to be a good thing in the national interest. So I would diversify where we get our strategic minerals from and do it in a place that can be regulated. I'd rather regulate it in an American state is perhaps not perfect as you'd like it, than maybe mining it someplace else where regulations just are out the door. So I think you have to diversify your energy equation, oil, gas, renewables, a lot of renewables. But I don't know how you transition to a green economy without getting rare earth or strategic minerals out of the ground. It doesn't work. Might as well do that in America's Arctic, Canada's Arctic, Greenland's Arctic, and do it in a way that abides by the rule of law, and if you don't, you get penalized and sanctioned and you're brought to court.
Hi, sir. My name is Ruthie Castry, and I'm a sophomore here at Duke. Thank you so much for speaking to us. This has been really informative. Something that I thought a lot about was how the U.S. still hasn't signed the Law of the Sea Treaty. Would you speak to why this hasn't occurred yet and what the implications to the Arctic are if we do one day?
Yeah, it goes off of what we were talking about before. I wish I could say that it wasn't political, but it's political. It is a chorus of members of Congress who believe that if we signed on to the laws of the sea, we would somehow give up our ability to navigate the oceans, to have a say in what happens globally. It's not just about the Arctic, it's the law of the sea for all of the globe. That somehow we would be ceding our U.S. ethos of freedom of navigation, making our own decisions for ourselves. I mean, there's a whole list of things that is a whole semester of a law school with. But it really is political. And when you have both sides of the aisle saying that it's a good thing for the United States to sign on because then you'll be at the table and you can have a say, instead of taking your chair and going over here and saying, I'm gonna make believe we don't have a say or can't influence the discussion. It just makes no sense, frankly. And that's both from R's and D's. And from those of us who have said we should sign on to the law of the sea because we've signed on to many UN, many multilateral, bilateral agreements. So I wish I had a better answer for you because I'm telling you that there are members of Congress and people who study the law of the sea for a living that understand the nuance of it, but will tell you that it comes down a lot to politics. And if you wanted to read more about that, my colleague Betsy Baker has written a series of publications for the Wilson Center's Polar Institute, all nested on governance and law of the sea. And she's done an absolutely wonderful job of breaking this issue down in a series of publications, so you don't have to read every section of the law of the sea treaty.
Well, hello, I'm Will. I'm a junior here at Duke. Do you think that systems like the Harmony sonar system and mothership submarines like Belgorod have sort of changed the strategic landscape in the Arctic? And do you think that sort of hampers the ability of the US to run operations like Ivy Bells back in the 60s and 70s?
What a great question. Yeah, it's changed. I mean, technology is changing everything. It used to be you go someplace and hide. And if you had really good technologies, you could hide even better. The gap between those who have and have not has shrunken, considerably. We see that with all sorts of technologies, whether it's nuclear technology. Think of Iran, North Korea. I mean, look at the advances that unfortunately have happened there. So what you just put your finger on, though, is a really important issue, and that is on the security side of the Arctic. It's not just, this is not an Arctic issue. This is a global security issue, intelligence issue, technology issue, is that these technologies, although we might be the ones who roll them out, secrets are stolen really quickly. Plans are found in corners of rooms, and sometimes they're stolen digitally. And once somebody has a drone or a technology like you're talking about, it's just really soon after everybody else has them. And so everybody's trying to be 3 steps ahead of everybody else. And so when you create a new technology, you also try to think of how others might exploit it, find it, detect it. And so you try to build in your detection systems accordingly. So yeah, it's changed the face of all of those things. And that's a great story about being able to tap cables. We're still that's a real thing. And with all of the cables being laid all over the globe, it remains a real thing. It's just far more sophisticated. I know our country still has advances, but China should not be ruled out in terms of advances, nor the Russian Federation and others. So I gave you this answer to a really complex question, but these technologies are just going to leapfrog. It was only a few years ago, we were the only country that was flying drones around at a certain capacity and rate. Now it's like, even Larry's got a drone now. So it's just become so evasive. And when does it stop? Which is why we get back to this cooperation versus competition. It's the cost benefit of trying to have some semblance of international law and governance that all modern societies follow versus continued escalation, where you have to continually think about outpacing. I don't know where this ends, by the way, but technologies and especially the technologies you're talking about.
My name is Jacob. Thank you so much for your time. I want to ask a quick question about spending money on security versus restoration itself and mitigation adaptation for climate change. So one of my really close friends from undergrad, she's from Kivalina, which I'm sure you're familiar, is this town in Alaska that's kind of sunk. So I was just curious, how do you kind of justify spending money for security, which I do think is very important, when we also have to help these communities kind of mitigate and adapt to climate? Thank you.
That's a great question. I've been to Kivalina. It's one of the 36, 38, 40 Alaska villages that are in danger of disappearing. It's like the village of Newtok. They've had to relocate that village 9 miles upriver. Part of the community has moved, the other part, the elders, they don't want to move, it's their home. It's just gut wrenching. If you don't think there's Arctic climate refugees, you're wrong. They're there, they're real. And to move a village like Kivalina will cost, pick a number, $120 million for 350 people. Do the numbers. Because that's the size of these villages. But do they not have a right to exist in a region? Some people think they should move to the great big cities of Anchorage, Fairbanks, and Juneau. Well, I don't know about you, but I kind of like what. So to me, it's not an either or. I think for the United States in our national interests, we simply have to have a national security and homeland security capacity to defend and protect our interests. That's Mike's opinion. Goes along with our NATO partners, and I think the transatlantic alliance being underscored right now. I mean, I can't remember a time when the European Union, NATO, Western nations have been more aligned since the Second World War. It's just amazing. It's been the opposite of what perhaps the intention was. So I think we have to do these things in our best interest. But I also think that we have to this is the existential threat of your generation, and my generation helped bring it on. But you have to invest in mitigation and adaptation. You have to. And I think this administration and former administrations, there's been a clarion call. If you got Secretary Kerry as a special envoy for climate, that's a good thing. If you got Gina McCarthy as your climate leader coordinator for the White House, that's a good thing. But the emphasis on it, the emphasis on it is one thing, but the investments, the Infrastructure Act has a lot of money in there for mitigation adaptation. And that's where it has to happen. We can find money for a lot of things. This country has found money for a lot of things. It's simply about priority. And priority is when people are impacted, when constituents yell, when there's real impact, unfortunately, to industry. When industry leaders tell Congress or the White House, this is really important, I have an issue here, things happen. It's called politics. And so what we should see here when I'm not in Alaska, I'm in DC, the lobbying effort to understand environmental security as much as you understand national security has been fascinating to watch in the last 5 to 10 years, and mostly in the last 3 or 4 years, that environmental security is a real thing, and you have to invest in it, and that is adaptation and mitigation, but you have to invest in the research to understand how to best adapt and mitigate. And that needs more resource from this federal government as well, aside from resource to help communities, whether it's in Fort Yukon or Fort Lauderdale, because we're dealing with something that we've never had to deal with. We built a civilization on what we thought was a stable climate. Well, I think that's kind of over now. So to me, it's not an either or. The answer is yes. It's just about scaling, and it's about understanding which priority needs to be where.
Thank you so much for being here. My name is Eleanor Ross. I'm also a sophomore here at Duke. And my question is a little on the negative side, I would say. Well, we all talk about, the negatives to climate change. Are there transportation companies and groups that are looking at it in a more positive light and encouraging this climate change to occur? We're not stopping these ice caps from melting. We know that they're going to, and by investing in things like icebreakers or investing in these new passages, doesn't it seem somewhat as if, yes, we're adapting to the new situation that's occurring, but simultaneously, are there organizations that you know of or groups that are encouraging in the hopes of monetary gain as it goes from 30 or 40 days to 13, as you said earlier?
So your question really is, are there those who, so correct me if I'm wrong, but are there those in a corporate boardroom somewhere that are saying, boy, we got an idea to monetize it? There might be. Industry will go where the dollars are. But if you invoke the big tech companies and those who we know about, the Bezos and the Musks and the others, There's many others actually around the globe. I'm sure some of this is to make a buck on a new technology or a new opportunity because it's changing. I don't know. I've not heard anyone cheer it on. I've heard some ignore it, and I've heard some try to explain it away. But climate is real, it is rapid, and it is relentless. This is not going anywhere. And I'm sure there are people who are looking to make a dollar off of this. What I see and have heard more of, what I've been around, my experience of people who are trying to figure out how to mitigate and adapt and make a dollar off of it, because that will spur new industry and new technology. So your question is really interesting. I don't know if there are, but I know there are companies and individuals looking for solution sets that they can monetize. And if you look at those, solar panel companies, I don't think they're cheering climate change on, but they're coming up with solution sets that are actually now more viable than ever. Not to say that there's a relationship there, but I think that's what happens if you allow, government has a role here. Government has a role to seed. But we seeded the highways, and then came gas stations, and then came communities. It's kind of like the old railroad. But I think the government has a role in seeding technologies to mitigate and adapt. The most obvious one is cut back on consumption of fossil fuels and diversify your renewables. That would be a good step forward. And look at what's happened. I mean, I wouldn't even have imagined that you would have the energy possibilities today. I wouldn't have thought about 10 years ago. I would have thought people talking about hydrogen, which makes water at the end, actually on a scale that could actually be a solution for a lot of things. In my own state, in Alaska, there's discussion about putting a small scale nuclear complex on one of the military bases because the technology has become so incredible that you may actually be able to do it. Now, it's not there yet. It's all here and on drawing boards and connect, but it's been proven. So small scale nuclear to power up communities is back on the table again because the technology is not 1981 anymore. It's not 3 Mile Island, 1978. I don't know. I was younger, but things have changed. And so it may not be the motivation that I'm glad climate change is happening, I'm gonna make a buck. It is about, okay, it's happening. We need to slow it down, stop it, and then mitigate. Because look, what's baked into our climate system right now, not to drag this out any longer, I apologize. But what's in our system right now is in our system. This trend line will be with us for decades. We're talking about out here 2030, 2040, 2050, when maybe we can cap it. Maybe we can keep it to some constant level. Maybe it can be predictable instead of it still going like this. The Arctic that I knew of many decades ago is probably gone. That's not going to happen anymore. And the environment that we knew is not going to happen. This is about stopping it from running away. So all of these technologies will be solution sets, but I don't know anybody sitting in a boardroom, I'm sure there are, who's thinking about this is really good for business. I'm sure there are, I just don't know them.
I think we have.
Hi, yeah, my name is Caleb. I'm a junior undergraduate. And you mentioned a little bit how China is having a higher priority on the Arctic. Are there other non-Arctic countries that are having an increasing focus on the Arctic? Or is it mainly just countries like the United States and Russia who are having some increasing priority?
That's a great question. Thanks for asking. It's not just China. Relatively late to the game. The Arctic Council, the 8 Arctic nations, they also have what's called observer nations. You have to be voted in. And between the observer nations and organizations like NGOs and others, there's something like 30 or 41 or 2 of those non-governmental organizations or states that are not Arctic states that are all part of the Arctic Council, but only the Arctic 8 nations are sort of around the table. The rest are observers. They get to be in the room. They get to be part of working teams, working groups. That's where China is. They are an observer nation. They participate in the research. But also is Japan and South Korea and Singapore and the United Kingdom and India. I could keep going. Why would these countries want to be observers to the Arctic Council? Because they have research interests, they have oil and gas interests, but the world needs proteins. So a lot of these countries are interested in the fishing parts of it. a lot of these countries are interested in. If you're gonna build a port, the Singaporeans would like to talk to you, because that's what they do for a living. Singapore is an observer to the Arctic Council. They have an ambassador for the Arctic, Singapore. So does Japan, so does South Korea, they have ambassadors to the Arctic. They're colleagues of mine. So everybody's looking at the North as an opportunity, and there's something going on there, so I'd best be a part of that, whatever that might be. But I could rattle off those countries, and I'll tell you what their interests are. Japan has an incredible interest in Arctic research. Why? Because they're interested in the arc that goes from the South Pacific, the South China Sea, the South Pacific, North Pacific, right into the Bering Sea, the Bering Strait, right into the Arctic. That is an arc. From Asia to the Arctic, that's an arc. That's fisheries, that's military, that's economics, it's cultural. The Japanese are very interested in the fishing stocks and the health of the climate because it impacts them. Climate doesn't happen just on the Atlantic side, it happens on the Pacific side too. So each nation has a motivation and equity in the Arctic. And what you're seeing is all these countries now wanting to be members of not just the Arctic Council as observers, but they want to be in the Arctic dialogue. Some of it's oil and gas, some of it's climate, some of it's fisheries, some of it's just to be in the room to understand better what's happening in this new space that's emerged in your lifetime. In your lifetime, a new ocean disappeared. Think about that one for a moment. Of course, every nation's going to want to have an interest there. So that's why they're there, and there are many non-Arctic states very interested in the Arctic.
I was remiss, Paige, I didn't mention at the beginning of this upcoming American Grand Strategy event. It is American Grand Strategy that's bringing you this interesting discussion. Tomorrow, at the Washington Duke, Putin's Endgame, Russia versus the West, former Ambassador Michael McFaul will be speaking at 6 p.m. And then on March 22nd, Major General Scott Jackson, who's the commanding general of the Security Force Assistance Command, will be appearing here in this room at 5:30. That's on March 22nd. So I urge you to keep an eye out for those. And now I urge you to join me in thanking Mike for a very stimulating. Thank you very much.